All right, let's get into it. Today, we are tackling a massive topic, one of the most complex, most controversial conflicts in modern history, the Vietnam War.
So here's the question, right? The one that hangs over this entire story. How in the world did the greatest superpower on the planet lose a war to a small, developing nation? I mean, think about it. The wealthiest, most teched-out military on Earth, and they couldn't win. The answer, as you're about to see, is way more complicated than just guns and money.
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we can't start in the jungles of Vietnam. Nope. We have to zoom out, way out, to the global stage, because this whole thing was really a collision of two superpowers during the Cold War.
And at the heart of America's reasoning was this one big idea, the domino theory. Seriously, this was the central belief driving everything. The folks in Washington were absolutely convinced that if Vietnam fell to communism, well, it wouldn't just stop there. They pictured this terrifying chain reaction, right? One country falls, then the next, and the next, just like a line of dominoes toppling all across Southeast Asia. Now, this whole thing didn't just pop up out of nowhere. It was a slow burn. It all kicked off back in 1954 when the country was literally split in two. Then things got really serious in '65 when the first U.S. combat troops landed. And after years and years of just brutal fighting, the U.S. finally pulled out in 1973, which led to the fall of Saigon and the reunification of Vietnam 2 years later.
And you've got to remember, before it became this huge superpower showdown, it was a civil war. At its core, this was Vietnamese against Vietnamese. You had the North, led by communists, who were driven by this incredibly powerful dream of one unified, independent nation. And then you had the South, which was anti-communist and had the full backing of the United States.
So that ideological split, it set the stage for a military conflict that was a total mismatch, a real Goliath versus David situation. But, and this is the key part, maybe not in the way you'd think. This was a clash of strategies, a clash of wills.
And you can see the two playbooks right here, and they couldn't be more different. The U.S. strategy was all about attrition, just overwhelming firepower. The idea was to use massive bombing runs and total air superiority to just pound the enemy until their will to fight was completely broken. North Vietnam, on the other hand, played a totally different game. It was a war of endurance. They used guerrilla warfare, these lightning-fast hit-and-run tactics, and their incredible knowledge of the jungle to make America's tech advantage almost meaningless. They were trying to bleed the superpower dry, one cut at a time.
And when we talk about America's arsenal, I mean, they brought everything. We're talking B-52 bombers dropping payloads from miles up in the sky. Huey helicopters zipping troops all over the battlefield, giving them mobility like never before. Napalm, tanks, boots on the ground. The strategy was simple, really. Technological shock and awe.
But here's the thing. All that tech, it could be beaten. Not with more tech, but with sheer ingenuity and willpower. The Vietnamese forces built literal cities underground in these massive tunnel networks. They turned the jungle, their home, into their greatest ally, setting up devastating ambushes. And through it all, they had this incredible perseverance and morale, fueled by deep support from the local population, and this unshakable belief that they were fighting for their home.
And this amazing resilience, it wasn't an accident. It was led. You had two incredible figures at the top. Ho Chi Minh, he was the heart of the revolution. He gave them that powerful vision of independence that kept everyone going. And then you had General Giap, who was the mind, a military genius who figured out how to outthink and outmaneuver a global superpower.
And this is absolutely crucial to understand. North Vietnam was not fighting this war alone, not by a long shot. They had a lifeline. The Soviet Union was shipping in modern weapons and providing training. China was sending funds and giving them huge political support. This wasn't just David versus Goliath. David had some very big friends in his corner.
So you have this epic clash of wills, of strategies, dragging on for nearly 20 years. And the cost? Well, it was just unimaginable. It's a cost you have to measure in both treasure and in human lives, and it left scars on both countries that are still there today.
Let's start with the money. The United States poured $168 billion into this war. Now, that number might sound big, but let's put it in perspective. In today's money, that's well over $1 trillion. Just think about that, a staggering amount of treasure.
But as massive as that number is, it's nothing compared to the human cost. Over 58,000 American service members never came home. 58,000 families torn apart. And for the Vietnamese people, the toll was just catastrophic. We're talking millions, millions of soldiers and civilians.
It's almost impossible to comprehend. You see, in the end, the war wasn't really lost on the battlefields of Vietnam. It was lost back home, in the living rooms of America. Every night on the news, people saw the relentless stream of casualties. It fueled this massive anti-war movement, and eventually, the political will in Washington to keep fighting just evaporated.
So what's the takeaway from all of this? What are the lessons learned? Because believe me, the ghost of Vietnam still haunts the world today. It offers these huge, profound lessons about what it really means to be a superpower, and more importantly, about the limits of that power.
Which brings us right back to that first big question we asked. With all that money, with all that incredible technology, why couldn't the US win?
When you boil it all down, it comes back to a few key things. The US made a fundamental miscalculation. Sure, they won most of the big conventional battles, but they were fighting the wrong war. They completely underestimated the sheer power of Vietnamese nationalism, of people fighting for their own home. Their guerrilla tactics made America's expensive technology way less effective. And in the end, their sheer will to survive and win just flat out outlasted America's will to keep fighting.
And maybe that's the biggest lesson of all, the one that echoes to this day. It's a stark, powerful reminder that there are limits to what firepower can do. It can't defeat the intangible things, like a nation's identity, or its political will to be free. The Vietnam War proved that all the technology in the world can't guarantee you a victory. And it leaves us with a question that every superpower still has to ask itself. When you're fighting a war for the very soul of a nation, how do you even know when you've won?